Hello, everyone, and welcome to our AAAM EMP event, Black Women in the Museums. In honor of Women's History Month, we are showcasing 3 women within the Association of African American Museums, cultural institutions. My name is Kayla Austin. I'm the Communications Manager for the AAAM EMP Committee, and we are very excited to have you all here today. Joining us are 3 prominent women in our field, starting with Aola Dance, acting superintendent. Hold on. She's a 20-year employee of the National Park Service, and she has served many roles in public history and historic preservation, to include the Frederick Douglass National Park. Sorry, is everyone muted? The Carter G. Woodson Home and the Harriet Tubman National Monument and Historical Park. After serving at the National Capital as the National Capital Regional Ethnographer, Aola joined the team at the Colonial National Historical Park as park historian and supervisor of resources stewardship and science. In that role, Aola manages a team of biologists, archaeologists, and collections managers. Similarly, Aola served as the chief of resources management at Fort Monroe from 2012 to 2014. With an interest in descendant community engagement and the arts, Aola specializes in discussing difficult topics in social history. She received a BA in history from Southern University A&M College, an MA in historic preservation from Savannah College of Art and Design, and a graduate certificate in environmental policy from the George Washington University. Aola is currently a 3rd-year PhD student at Howard University, majoring in U.S. history with a minor in African diaspora and public history. Her research focuses on race in 17th century America, the evolution of racialized slavery, as well as opportunities for healing and reconciliation. Our second panelist is Lauren Tate Beza, with an S, is the Fred and Rita Richmond Curator of African Art at the High Museum of Art in Atlanta, overseeing a collection that includes impressive examples of African masks, sculptures, textiles, beadwork, and ceramics. She previously served as the director of exhibitions at the National Center for Civil and Human Rights, where she curated the Morehouse College Martin Luther King Jr. collection and organized numerous temporary exhibits using the visual arts to engage with social issues. Beza speaks, lectures, and consults at universities, nonprofit organizations, and federal departments on a range of cultural and socio-political topics related to Africa and the African diaspora. She holds a Master's of Arts in African Studies from University of California at Los Angeles and a Bachelor's of the Arts in Africana Studies from California University Northridge. She has been featured on NPR and PBS, as well as the Associated Press, Art Papers, Arts ATL, and the Atlanta Journal Constitution. Olivia, our last panelist, is Olivia Williams. She began working as a cultural history interpreter at the McLeod Plantation Historic Site in 2016. At McLeod, they interpret the history of enslaved people and the legacies of slavery. During her time at McLeod, she has become certified through the National Association of Interpretation as an interpretive guide, and she earned her bachelor's in history and African American studies from the College of Charleston and is pursuing a Master of the Arts in history with a concentration in public history. She is currently a graduate assistant at the Avery Research Center for African American History and Culture. So thank all of you guys for joining us today. Here's everyone's actually. And we're looking forward to having this conversation with everyone. So as far as all of you guys in our audience, we would love to get the chance to know you guys more. So feel free to post your name and institution any questions and comments that you have as we're going, and please be sure to mute your microphone. So ladies, it's so nice to have you guys with us today. I can't figure out how to, there you guys are. And I guess we can kind of jump right into our questions, huh? So our conversation today will generally be around, you know, our representation as Black women in the historically white field, like. Oh, sorry.
Little after five. Little after five.
Someone needs to.
Someone's unmuted.
Oh.
As well as current issues of race and gender experienced in our field. So I guess to get started, we'd like to discuss what inspired you to get into your field, whether it be museums, history, or historic sites. What stories did you feel were missing that you would that were the kind of catalyst for you getting involved here? Aola, I think that's a good one. Just if you
Happy to kick things off, and thank you so much to AAAM and to emerging professionals for this invitation. I actually am one of those folks where I was pretty young and excited about museums. I grew up in a household with Smithsonian Magazine and National Geographics and Ebony Magazine talking about fine arts and, you know, just traveling about to museums and historic sites. I grew up in the Hampton Roads area, but my family's all from Louisiana. And so every time someone came to visit, we had to take them to DC, take them to all of these different places. So I spent lots of hot summers on Tourmobile and, you know, kind of traveling around, but I was just so intrigued with collections. I had not really thought about a career in historic sites in the field that I'm doing now. I really didn't know it existed until I was approaching graduation. But I just recall being about age 12 and being aware of the field, the term curator or the position curator, and idealizing the opportunity to work in museums. I wanted to touch artifacts. I wanted to know about the history and the people, and I wanted to talk about those stories. Strangely, I did not see the African-American perspective at these sites. And when I did, it was very monolithic. It was the history of slavery. And so even in telling the history of slavery, we're so dynamic. And so that's what much of my work has been about, is expanding that narrative and engaging and talking about slavery with descendants, you know, both in the US as well as more broadly across the diaspora.
Well, that's beautiful. Yeah, it's always nice hearing about people where this was, you know, kind of a foundation of the way that you grew up seeing the world. What about Lauren or Olivia? Do either of you want to jump in on this one?
So,
sorry. Lauren started first. Olivia will.
Mine's really brief. I just am going to respond because there were a lot of questions in there. I'm just going to respond to the sort of, when did I want to delve deeper sort of part of the question you asked. And I think for me, my interest, probably for a lot of us here, in art, you know, in how I wanted to engage with art and like sort of toying with that started really young. But when it sort of crystallized in a way that made me know I wanted to work in museums in some capacity, was probably when I was volunteering at the Fowler Museum at UCLA. I had interned at another museum, and that was my first experience really sort of getting to see behind the scenes of how museums operate and work. But it wasn't until I was volunteering, and I mean, I was there for a long time. It was almost 3 years, just as a volunteer, not an internship at the Fowler, that I really got to see incredible examples of the capacity for museums to engage community. And it was that sold me on museums. It wasn't the art and all of that you can get at a lot of institutions, but like they showed me the possibilities to really become a community institution and engage people in all of these different ways of learning and ways of seeing the same exhibit. And they just really, to me, maximize that and maximize the opportunities for learning that exhibitions presented. And that stuck with me and made me understand that working in museum spaces was the way I wanted to engage art.
Beautiful. Yeah, I think that, and that's one of the beautiful things about AAAM is that community feeling, and that all of us have that kind of joint mission of creating spaces for one another. What about you, Olivia?
So mine's kind of different. My parents are a big inspiration behind me being a historian and just getting more into the field. My dad is actually a history teacher. And so I've been surrounded by it for as long as I can remember. And my mother would always do a really good job of, when we went on family vacations, making sure we hit historic spots as well. And so I was really exposed to a lot of history, whether it be from my father or my mother. And I actually, while I've always loved history, I never wanted to really make a career out of it. I just wanted to kind of make it a hobby. And I actually was in school to be a nurse. And I took an anatomy class and was like, nope, can't do this. So I decided to just go with my passion, which is history. And here we are. And even going to grad school for it and stuff, like I put that off for a while too, because I was like, I don't want to go back to school. College was hard enough. But now that I'm about to graduate in less than 2 months, I'm really glad that I did it, because it truly has been a rewarding experience. Being someone who works at a plantation hasn't always been the most pleasant experience, but I think that it's made me a much stronger historian as well.
Yeah, so how did you end up at McLeod?
So I actually was working at Fort Sumter, and I saw a pamphlet for McLeod because they actually just opened in 2015. And I was like, oh, what's this? And so when I looked into it, they were actually hiring. And I'd never been interested in interpretation, like didn't even consider it. I always kind of wanted to be an archivist. And when I was in college, I actually did this like mostly 20th century civil rights, especially Malcolm X. So going into something like slavery, I was like, oh, I'm not, really well versed in. Being in South Carolina, they don't exactly spend a lot of time teaching us about slavery either. And so when I applied, I met Sean. Y'all might know Sean Halifax. And I've been there almost 5 years in August.
Oh, great. It's quite a while. So I think we've covered most of those questions. Since it's Women's History Month, we're going to delve into this. How do you think being a woman has impacted your work? How does, especially being a Black woman in this field?
I think being a Black woman in this field and in a lot of fields, it like sharpens your creativity and innovation tools. You have to find new routes to the things that you want to achieve, because so much was not created for you. And I don't even mean the institutional job. I mean the things that you can get to make yourself a better candidate for the institutional job. So going all the way back to like the kinds of fellowships that are available to you that you even know exist before you apply. The kind of schools that you're able to get into or pay for. I mean, there's so many different sort of barriers to success, however you define it, and perhaps even more if you want to work in a space that is male dominated and or white dominated, and you are neither of those things. And so I think the biggest sort of gift, though it's been difficult, of being a Black woman in a lot of professional spaces is that you have to become so flexible and creative, and there's a tenacity that you have to adapt for that makes you unbeatable when you get really good at it. Again, and that's not to negate the fatigue and extra labor that is problematic, but at the end of the day, I think that we are incredibly competitive because we have so many things that we have to learn how to navigate around that are social, political, and economic. So yeah, I think that's my positive view on sort of systems of oppression and how they can be things that sharpen the tools in our toolbox.
We have time for the other views. We'll get there. Aola, you look like you were ready to
Yes.
jump in on that one.
Yes. Oh, I just identified with so much that was mentioned there. In my experience, it's completely relevant. I oftentimes notice and talk about being the only woman in the room, the only Black woman in the room, and oftentimes, the only for many years it was person under 40, and now it's under 50. So I'm in that cusp of leadership, and so it's noticeable and it's felt. And sometimes I reacted to it well when it was, thinking in terms of, when and where I enter, all my people, my race enters with me, all other women enter with me, and that was enough. But there were other times where it was actually quite challenging to be expected to represent everyone all of the time. And so that was something that, especially in the last few years, I've thought about quite a bit, especially when I'm in a role where I can shape someone else's experience. And so as a woman, I've sought like-minded people and really worked hard to create positive experiences for other women, especially Black women and women of color in my organization. Oh, Kayla, we can't
Always
hear you.
done a wonderful job at making everyone who meets you feel very included. So
Wow.
like definitely always memorable about you. And then Olivia, your work focuses on specifically Black women in enslaved moments. So would you like to talk more about how your womanhood has affected your research? Because it seems like it's everything.
Yeah, so at McLeod, just for those of you who may not be as familiar with it, we actually are all able to take on our own perspective of slavery and the legacies of slavery. And so mine is about enslaved women, all about their trauma and their experiences. And a really good book that I pulled a lot of my information from is Birthing a Slave. And The Price for Their Pound of Flesh is another one that I draw from. And I just talk about all the really difficult parts. And I actually end my tour by saying, if you don't take away anything else from this tour, I need you to know that Black women were the most physically, mentally, and emotionally abused person on the plantation, while being the very backbones that plantations were built on. And so I was like, that's why we're going to talk about them. Up until 2018, I actually was the only Black person at McLeod. And then one of my coworkers, John, he came on. And then in 2020, actually right before the pandemic, we got my wonderful coworker, Toby. And so luckily now, I have them there as well. But for a while, it was just me. And I've had quite a few experiences. And being, especially a young woman, they do not like to overlook the fact that I'm young, question my credentials. Do you even know what you're talking about? Are you even old enough to be here? I had someone ask me if I just graduated from high school recently. And I was like, I'm in my 20s, And so people don't take me seriously because of my age, because of my gender, because of the color of my skin. And I had a man, white man, call the police on me once at work because I asked him and his family to move their photo shoot, which photo shoots on plantations are weird anyway. We could talk about that another time. But I just asked them if they could move. They were on a tour route. Long story short, he didn't like the fact that I was telling him that. And so after he got done berating me and being very aggressive, he stormed off and he was like, I'm not taking this from a Black woman. And he called the cops on me and was very upset. So that's just kind of a very personal experience of what it's like being this, I guess, woman of color on a plantation. Because it's definitely affected my work pretty significantly, but someone's got to do it. And so I guess that's why I'm still there.
I mean, it is incredibly important work, and I'm sorry that you have to go through that. And I'm sure that there are similar experiences that a lot of us could touch on in that same vein. We're going to talk about something a little bit more positive, and then we'll get back into the hard stuff. So I want to talk about, mentorship and the support systems that we're able to provide one another. And if you, who was the first person that you considered to be your mentor, whether that was a sustained relationship or whether it ended?
I'm happy to jump in. Yeah. This is kind of one of those topics I get really passionate about because I wouldn't be able to do the work that I do without having had really strong mentors. And so I'm going to mention more than one. I hope that's okay. In undergrad at Southern University, which is an HBCU, I was mentored by Eva Baham. She's now at Dillard, and Dr. Troy Allen. Both of them, PhD scholars from Purdue and Temple, who just had incredible perspective and experience and pushed us to think beyond, what we were, taught at home, really to deal with the source materials and to think from a like diasporic perspective. And so that was transformative for me. And then professionally, the two mentors that I had were Kim Elder, the super site manager at the Frederick Douglass National Historic Site when I first began working there, and Dr. Elizabeth Clark Lewis, the director of public history at Howard University. And without them, I would not be here, would not be able to do what I do. But I have to say something about what Liv mentioned in terms of someone has to do this. That's literally what Dr. Troy Allen said to me when I second guessed working for the National Park Service. My first role was at Mount Rainier. They thought they wanted diversity. They were not ready for diversity. I stayed 1 week. But what he said to me that inspired me to even go to a place I'd never been before, active volcano, live in a historic house, on the West Coast, and I'm from Virginia, was someone has to tell these stories. And if not you, then who? And when I pictured that experience I had growing up at Yorktown, Jamestown, only seeing Black people interpreted as enslaved, it was like I knew I had to do it. And so those mentors have just been so critical all along the way, and really shaped what type of mentor I try to be.
Sorry, I keep muting myself. My kiddos in the background, like fiddling with things. Yeah, I think that the impact that our mentors have is just profound, and I think that even on a friend level, that we can provide mentorship to one another. Olivia, you seem like you trying to hop in there?
I agree. It started in undergrad for me as well. My African American Studies professor, Dr. Green, he basically is the reason that I even minored in African American Studies, because African American Studies didn't become a major at the College of Charleston until 2014. And so I took so many classes with him. I, got to know him really well. He became kind of one of my advisors, and he's actually still someone that I communicate with even now. And I've been at an undergrad since 2015. And he really just showed me how important African American Studies, African American history is. And so then I was like, okay, it kind of opened the doors to all that there can be done with the study of African American people. As far as now, I just kind of want to give a shout out to the people that I work with at McLeod. One of my coworkers, Paul, is actually tuned in right now. And we have a small staff. I think excluding my boss, there's like maybe 6 of us. And so we're really, close knit, and we're just there for each other through all the hard stuff, all the really terrible visitors, but the good stuff too. I mean, so I really could not do the work I do day in and day out at McLeod without having them there. And so I just definitely want to say thanks to them. And of course, my parents, they're the best. So those are kind of my guiding lights through this.
Because it is hard work if you feel like you're doing it alone. So, Lauren, did you have anyone that you wanted to call out publicly? You don't have to. We can go.
I didn't really have any mentors. My story is very different in that I had to kind of, we don't have time to go into it, but my journey was very circuitous. I didn't even get my undergraduate degree until I was 30 years old. And so my approach has been really like scrappy and focused. And I suppose to the extent that I have mentors, it's been, millions of mentors all over the world that I could look up online or read about and research, and then just kind of doing the work. It would have been amazing to have maybe had a more conventional path, I suppose, in terms of some relative ease in preparation for things. But my life just didn't work out that way. I didn't go to college and get set up in that kind of way, and then go to grad school and then get the fellowships. And then I didn't do it any kind of way like that. My journey took me to like a couple of different continents and a completely different field before museums. And so when I decided I wanted to do this, or redecided, because I think I had to be reintroduced to museums a couple of times before I finally listened to my intuition and my destiny and purpose. I think by the time I got there, I was just focused. I had all these ideas about where I wanted to be, and I would just manifest it. And so I actually didn't have sort of that experience that I hear a lot of people have, especially now. I do a lot of work with the Atlanta University Center. And it's wonderful. They have this community of support and mentorship. But that just wasn't my story. So I think the lesson from that is, before I turn the mic back over, is that if you don't have that sort of traditional student path, that you can still achieve incredible things. The information is available to you. You can do research, you can buy books, you can put yourself through school, and you can still have some incredible outcomes. And then at that point, you said this already, Kayla, your peers become your mentors at that point. You have other people you can talk to and chat with and share ideas and strategies and vent, because that's important too, and all of that. But I didn't have a sort of conventional youngin coming in with an older peer in my field sort of guiding me. But it worked out for me.
Aola, you wanted to hop in there.
There are so many jewels in what Lauren just said. I just wanted to add that a lot of times this journey is not linear, and don't give up. I progressed well if you look at my titles and time frame, but my academic path was like all over the place, and my pay was sometimes a sidestep or a backstep. And so, just stay focused on what it is you want to do, take risks, and let people know what you want to do. So many jewels in what you said. Everyone's path is so different, so different.
Yeah, and I think another really big thing that you kind of already said, but I want to reiterate it because it bears repeating, is trust yourself, right? Like, when there isn't necessarily anyone in your immediate space that knows, that kind of gets what you want to do or understands your ambitions, you understand them. And so, I didn't wait for permission for anyone to tell me, you should apply for this or you should go for that. Or if you take this angle, you can probably leverage this previous experience that doesn't seem related to this new thing. I didn't wait for anyone to tell me that. I knew that I could do it. And so I just worked it. And so I think the worst case scenario is, it doesn't work out. But at least you've tried, and man, going for it certainly is worth the risk.
Absolutely. And like, if you guys have never met Lauren before, she has like an energy that like emanates from her. It's beautiful. You'll see it the second you meet her. It's great. So, and I think that it's really valid. And I think, Lauren, you and I have a lot in common there where our paths are so untraditional. And I think, like, you know, I had my daughter really early on, and, you know, she was on my hip through all my college courses. And, like, when I graduated with my fine arts degree, she put her work up in the gallery too, because she'd been there. She was like, I went to college too. Like, you can't tell me.
Yeah, same. And I think that's an important part of this talk, you know, being a women-centered conversation. I mean, I had a daughter, same thing, on my hip in class, trying to figure out, you know, what the hell I'm doing at like 27 years old, studying something that isn't a quote unquote safe bet. I studied African studies and Africana studies. I did not study art history, which that also wouldn't have been the safest bet, but I went way out there with, you know, with really playing to and leaning into my interests and passions, and it has not failed me so far. But yeah, same thing, Kayla. Had a young daughter while I was going on this journey, trying to raise her and learn how to be a mom all at the same time. So I had mentors for motherhood, though.
That means a lot. That really does. I mean, and I think that's something we don't provide a lot of space for as women, to talk about our personal lives and how that impacts everything. I mean, I know my daughter impacted everything I've ever chosen to do as an adult. It's been like, is she going to be proud of me when she looks back at all this? And, you know, she is. She got mad at her teacher. They're in American history, right? So they're just starting to learn about slavery. And she's like, can we learn about someone else other than George Washington? I'm like, ooh, you're gonna get in trouble. But, like, you go for it, kiddo. So yeah, I think that that's all important to be talking about. So now I can kind of ease back into some of these heavier topics. So, and Olivia, you touched on this pretty strongly. How do you deal with being in historically white institutions and places where, as a Black woman, our bodies are not recognized and definitely are not, you know, elevated to the level that we definitely deserve?
I think it's kind of funny you asked that, because just like 3 weeks ago, it was very recent. I start my tour talking about, you know, this is the McLeod plantation, this is who they were, Civil War, Reconstruction. And then I get into the women. And so I had this couple. It was a white woman and a white man. And I said, okay, guys, like, now we're going to talk about Black women. And this woman looked me dead in my face and said, can we just move on? She was like, I just want to keep moving. And I was like, but you knew that we were talking about Black women. And I think for me, because I've been doing this so long, that I pick and choose my battles. Because old Olivia would have, you know, shut down and been like terrified. But I was like, no, you're gonna get this history today. And so at the end of it, she said, sorry, she said, so what do they feed these slaves anyway? And I was like, they're not dogs. They're not animals, you know? And I was like, after all this, that's what you, and so it's just tough, because being in a place like Charleston, especially, you know, the holy city, you know, people come, they don't want to hear about slavery. They want to hear about Gone with the Wind, porches, gardens, family. And, you know, people ask me, is this the house from Gone with the Wind? And I'm like, we're not in Hollywood. You know that this is, but like this Moonlight and Magnolias thing is what they call it. And so when people realize that we're talking about slavery, they get so resistant, so shut down. Not everybody, though. Some people, especially these last couple of years, have been probably more receptive than any time. But people do not want to learn about slavery at a plantation. And people especially, which is so weird, and people especially don't want to learn about Black women on a plantation. And I realized that when I talk about breeding, when I talk about rape, when I talk about sexual violence, that's usually the part where people tune out. And that's usually the part where people accuse me of embellishing and people accuse me of making stuff up. And my favorite story, and then I'll pass it over just to kind of bring home the point of these really white spaces. And I will also say, hopefully this is a safe space to say this. The administration that we've had for the last 4 years has made a huge impact on working at a plantation, people in red hats, people coming to provoke us. And I will say that trying to remain professional through that has been hard, especially because people will directly attack, not just me, but my other coworkers as well. One of my other coworkers, right before the election, hey, she's a Black woman. This man said to her, you know, if Trump wins, y'all be back in those fields, right? Like, people come and say that to us. But this is my last story, and then I'll pass it over. At the end of a tour, this white woman asked me, probably my most asked question, other than how old are these trees, was William McLeod a nice slave owner? And I was like, he owned people. I was like, people who own people aren't nice. And she was like, so you can't say anything nice about him. And I was like, he owned people. And she got so irate. If you ever want a good laugh, go look at McLeod's TripAdvisor reviews. You will, especially my coworker Paul, they either love him or they don't. But she left a TripAdvisor review about me. But yes, how old the trees are, yes, always. But I said he owned people, you know, people who own people aren't nice. And so she starts going off, yelling at me, telling me I shouldn't be working there. I'm embellishing my tour. I'm not good at my job. And she was like, you're just racist towards me because I'm a white woman. And I was like, because I won't say that William McLeod was nice. And so she went on TripAdvisor. She emailed my boss and basically told everyone that I was this racist person because I wouldn't appease her. And unfortunately, in Charleston, we're up against 4 other plantation historic sites whose narratives aren't necessarily centered on enslaved people. And actually, at a few of them, they make you charge extra for getting a slavery tour. And though, like, the main part of it, and then it's like, okay, it's an extra $20 if you want to learn about slavery. And so it's been kind of hard navigating that as well. But like I said, lately, at least, people have been coming because they're like, oh no, we're here because we want the truth. We want the real story. And so that's been a nice, but you know, you always have those moments where people are very resistant, but especially coming from a woman of color because they feel attacked. They feel guilt. That white guilt is real. And it wasn't until I started working on a plantation that I realized that even if you say nothing at all, they're going to feel attacked. But anyway, sorry, Lauren, go ahead.
No, you don't need to be sorry. That's what you're here for.
Yeah. Also, I love you gonna get this history today. I feel like I'm now gonna have to use that. I hope you don't mind. To the question, Kayla, you know, how do you deal with being in historically white institutions? You know, what have you had to learn? It's, you know, to continue to have progress in those contexts. I think, and I hope you guys don't mind me taking up a little bit of space here, but I think you show up with the full value of your unique perspective, and then you match that with a few strategies that I think are really important and actually didn't even occur to me that I would ever have to articulate until my recent position, when I've been asked by lots of people or checked in on by lots of people. And that is that you sort of, one, you manage your expectations. I think that's extremely important. I expect dogs to bark and chickens to cluck. And so I don't have an outsized response of anger or frustration when those things happen, which frees me up to devote my time on strategizing. And what I mean by strategizing very specifically is like leveraging every single opportunity that you have, all of them, even the ones that seem like they might be not preferred in the moment, into success. Thinking about what you're going to do next and how you're going to use those experiences to do that next thing. And for me, I'm thinking 3 steps ahead always. So I don't really have time to get sort of weighted down in the negative experience I might be having. And that's not to say that that experience isn't important. It does impact me in other ways, or isn't real. I just I just have learned to sort of allocate my time thinking about how I'm going to win, and that I might not win is never an option. It never even occurs to me. And what I was sort of referencing a minute ago when I said until I got this job, in my new position at the High Museum, I have had people approach me on the street, text me, email me, and say, "We're worried about you. Are you going to be okay?" And for me, it's been like this strange thing. I'm like, why would I not be okay? Like, and I haven't experienced the feedback in a positive way, even though I guess intellectually I understand that it's coming from a place of concern and perhaps community. And maybe it's people letting me know they're available if I need them. But I just don't engage the world in that way, or white supremacy in that way. I don't give white supremacy that much power, where I wouldn't relinquish so much power as to create a situation for myself and my well-being and the community that needs me, to the extent that you would need to worry about me. I would never give that much power away. I just wouldn't. It's not an option for me. Something would change, period. Whether that means I leave or whatever it means in any situation in my life, right? Like I would hope that, and people who know me, I guess, wouldn't have asked this. It hasn't been tended to be people that know me really well, but I would never relinquish that much power. So to sort of warrant the kind of concern that I saw in people's faces, nothing's happened to me yet, or will happen, I don't believe, because again, I don't manage space like that. But yeah, I think that those are really important things. And the third one, because I said manage expectations. I want to say one more note about managing expectations. You know, this is kind of transcending professional talk here a little, but not only do I expect chickens to cluck and dogs to bark, but I'm going to use a war metaphor. If I'm in battle with an enemy, I don't expect that enemy to help me, right? Like, so I'm not going to say, hey, you know, I don't have any guns. We're getting whooped. Can I get some of your guns real quick so I can help defeat you? Because that's not a reasonable expectation. So if you're following my metaphor, I also don't ask for a lot from people whose expectations I've managed. I just worry about myself and how I'm going to navigate the situation. That is to say that there are givens. And I will reference a little bit about how I grew up, because I realized that this is a huge part of it sort of recently, and in a recent interview talked about my childhood a little. My parents raised me to have this entire like sort of arc of understanding of who I am as a person of African descent, of which the teeniest slither, like the teeniest, tiniest part, was the story of the transatlantic trade and the social and economic disenfranchisement of people of African descent in America. That's not to say that it's not important, but it is to say that my approach to the world and my sense of belongingness far outweighs any concerns about how I'm going to be next victimized, or even thinking that I'm going to be next victimized, because I'm so busy thinking about, I've been indoctrinated with this idea of Black excellence. So I again, it never occurred to me that you need to worry about me, because it never occurs to me that I'm not going to win. It's just a deep part of who I am. And so again, managing expectations, strategizing. And then the third thing is that piece I just said, which is sort of a harder thing to grasp sometimes. And that's just like a deep emotional and sort of mental sense of self-worth. And those are my three pieces of advice for like managing white spaces, white supremacy in general in the world. I think that some of this stuff is just not going to change. And I guess optimists listening to me would not love to hear me say that. But I think that if we know that some things are going to just be the way they are, then we have to take some accountability for how we're going to maneuver around those unchangeable things. I personally do not believe, and this is just me, that I will ever see a day where there's no racism in America. I think the most American thing I can think of is racism. It's the foundation of everything. It's in the veins of everything. So the only way that I imagine racism ending is the fall of America. And so, I don't think I will see that. And so if I accept that, not accept it as in it's okay, but reconcile it really just sort of own that that is the case, then I am not spending energy being shocked and angry, and as much as I am spending time thinking about how I am going to survive in the context of this space. So that was really long-winded. Thank you for the floor, but it's been this really intense sort of, if you can't tell, sort of like a thought process for me, and like series of questions I've asked myself as I'm approached by people with these sad looks on their faces about me being in a white institution because of their assumed negative outcomes and the power that they assume that I might give an institution to make me that unhappy or uncomfortable in my Blackness. I just don't give them that power. I don't give anyone that power. I manage my expectations, and I think about how I'm going to leverage every opportunity.
I just want to quickly say, sorry, what you said about like kind of survival, I feel you on that. And I also feel you on, you kind of know what to expect when it comes to white supremacy. Like, it doesn't really shock you. And you're just like, okay, you're racist. I'm here at my job. You don't have to be here, but here you are. So I totally feel you on just picking and choosing your battles, especially as a woman, and, you know, especially as a Black woman, especially the very passive aggressive, wow, you're so articulate. And I'm just like, like, why did you automatically assume that I wasn't? So when you were talking about giving away your
Thank
power.
you. Like, that's my response. I'm so articulate. Oh, thanks.
Yes, thank you. And so what you were saying about not giving away your power is something that I'm really going to internalize, because that's not something I've thought about before. And I haven't thought about it going as far as, you know, when people are hindering me from doing my job, that I am giving the power that they came looking for to take away from me. So I really appreciate you saying that, because that's something that I'm going to take back with me.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Kayla, I won't say much because I think Liv and Lauren really, they gave us so much to think about and work with. I have spent the last several years of my career working in spaces where I'm changing the narrative. And so I'm particularly at Fort Monroe, where first Africans in the state of Virginia arrived in 1619, as well as the location of where Jefferson Davis was imprisoned after the Civil War. The history of Fort Monroe is predominantly significant to African-American experience, to include the contraband decision and African freedom seekers finding refuge all over the country during the Civil War behind Union lines. These are really dynamic, complicated histories. So I won't, because of time, I can't dig in deep. But what I wanted to say was, you know, for 400 years, the history and the narrative has not been about that long legacy at this site. And so I've been since 2012, oftentimes the only African-American, oftentimes the only woman at the table, like pushing people who were very comfortable with lost cause narratives, and that being the focus, to accept that that is not actually the true history of this site, nor is it going to be the focus of what we'll talk about moving forward. And we have here even leadership who've made mistakes. They've said things that were incorrect or debated by historians. And what I've appreciated is the willingness to engage in the dialogue and be able to really change that narrative and speak the truth. And so there's a lot that's different here, but there's struggles. So as Lauren, I'm right with everyone else when you said you're managing your expectations. And I really focus on my goal, my purpose, like my life's purpose, and what I believe I'm here to do. And that's beyond my organization, you know, but I'm able to do so by contributing in this space. And it's not the only way to do history. And so I appreciate that. I also appreciate coupling the arts and the history. It actually, to me, is one of the best ways to connect with people of all ages and backgrounds when you have that opportunity to introduce literary, performing, and visual art and talk about the difficult topics. So that has been my strategy in these spaces where I'm oftentimes the only African American at the table.
Yeah, definitely. Lauren, we're going to have you teach masterclass in self-confidence as you've got that all the way down. She's like, no, don't do it. Yeah, I think we covered most of our hardest questions. So we're going to do a couple of small follow-up questions, and we're going to open the floor to a Q&A for whoever is interested. I think I have one or two from the chat. So what advice do you guys give to, and I think Lauren has her section covered, what advice do you give to emerging museum professionals, especially those within the AAAM EMP group? Whoever wants to start off.
I actually am not covered. I have like one little thing that I wanted to add. I think my advice to emerging museum professionals is my advice to all emerging professionals. And I wish someone had told me this. You are in a transactional relationship. Remember that you are a complete person. You get money in exchange for your services, and then you go home. You have a whole life. You have a whole world to experience. Do not invest more, even if it's something you're passionate about and you love most aspects of the job that you have. It is a job. That is my advice to everybody, right? Like all the young folks, I tell my daughter's only 14. I tell her, like, when you go to work, like, that's just your job. It's not your identity. It's not worth much more than the hours you give them that you are compensated for. So that's my little piece. And then I'll leave it to people to be more specific to maybe our other panelists will be more specific to museums, but I just think that's extremely important. And it's probably even more important when you actually are really passionate about your job, because it's harder to turn it off.
So that's my struggle is, I absolutely was that person where this was my purpose. My life's purpose was attached to it. My identity was attached to it. That is a slippery slope. And so I had to find that balance. And so my father actually said exactly what you mentioned. He said, you agreed to do a certain thing for a certain amount of money in a certain amount of time. And each time your employer comes back to you asking for something different, that's renegotiation. And he said, I wish I knew this sooner. And so he had worked, 20 years in the Army, 20 years in the federal government. And this was my 4th year in the National Park Service. When he said this to me, that relieved me of, so much. Like, I don't buy into getting paid in sunrises and sunsets, because when you're passionate about the work and, committed, and it's a service that you will do for free, people sometimes take advantage of that. And so you have to protect that aspect of, and it is your choice when you want to do that. I do still see it very much so as my passion. And so my advice to you is to know what you want, share it with trusted people. So along the way, you will find people who you can tell those folks what your dream is, what your dream job is. You can work through a 5-year plan with them, a short-term plan with them. They'll look out and they'll mention opportunities. They'll collaborate on a project and create something just so that you can, get those experiences that you need and want. And don't be afraid to take risks. I've moved all over the country. I've, like I said, taken forward steps, back steps, side steps. And I don't feel limited in any way by my institution. I appreciate what I'm able to contribute here, but I always collaborate, and I always remain open and receptive to what, is ahead of me. So I just wish you all great success. And if I can be of help, please don't hesitate to reach out.
Olivia, you got something?
I think I have 2 pieces of advice. The first being, and it took me a long time I haven't been in this field nearly as long as the other 2, but something I've learned just in these like short kind of 5 years is not being afraid to stand up for yourself when you feel something is wrong. Even if you think that it's not going to be well received, just still speak up and, talk about it, because I know what it's like to be in a space where you're like, oh, I'm here again. But you kind of have to, just speak up. And the other part of it, I totally agree about it being your passion. And when you go home, it's hard to take it off because you love it so much. And then you just take it home with you and then it just sits on you. And so I get that about finding a balance as well. My other piece of advice, I was just talking about this the other day, especially in the museum world, fresh out of undergrad and stuff, just be prepared to not maybe get paid always. Volunteering, interning, as disheartening as it is to have a whole degree and then be someone's unpaid intern, it sucks. But it is a piece of advice that I like to tell people, because I have been giving some incredible opportunities based off of volunteer experience and internship experience. And I recognize that not everyone is in a financial position where unpaid things work. I mean, I had to work while I did these unpaid things. But I always tell people, an opportunity, as long as it works for you, if it's unpaid, sometimes it does work out. At the Citadel, which is a military college in South Carolina, I was volunteering under their archivist for a year. And after that year, she offered me a job. And so I was thrilled. But it did take that year-long unpaid experience. So, and also just a little side note, you may not always, at first get paid what you think you deserve. And that, is another unfortunate reality. But that's what I really agree with what you said about being ready, being open-minded, being prepared to move around if you need to, being receptive. And I especially love what you said about collaborating, because I realized in this field, you got to be bigger than your institution, because there are so many opportunities, so many people to meet, so many people to know, people who can put you on. I mean, if it wasn't for the people that I've met in this field, there's no way I'd even be on this panel right now. So networking is huge. I really wish AAAM was going to be in person, the virtual conference. I mean, the conference is going to be in person, but again, even virtually, I mean, that networking is still there. And I encourage people to tap into that as much as possible.
Okay, great. Thank you guys so much. And we're going to open up the floor to any questions. I had one that came in through the chat. And I think most of us have been stable. Have any of you stepped away from the museum field or your historic site and returned? And what does that process look like? What pushed you out of your space or put you on the verge?
I actually have not. I've been 20 years with the National Park Service, and it's almost like every time I think I'm done and I'm walking away, something happens to pull me right back in. So I almost left and was a teacher. I have pursued academics along the way while working. I have a family, but and even at this stage, I absolutely consider, what do I want to do next? Where else can I do this same work? And I think of that and consider coming back. I'll be working until I'm 60. I have a 4-year-old, an 11-year-old, and a 15-year-old. So, there's a lot to consider. And so I've just stayed open-minded. So I'm curious how others have sort of navigated between disciplines and institutions as well.
So I haven't actually left McLeod. Like I said, it's been almost 5 years. But when you said on the verge of, that definitely resonated with me. Because I remember back in, I think, because people act crazy in the summertime. It's always the summertime when people want to come to the plantation and just show out. And I remember I sat down with my boss and I said, I can't do this. I was like, I just can't. I was like, people are so racist and so terrible. And I was like, and I love this work. I was like, but who would want to subject themselves to this every day? And he was really receptive and understanding. But I didn't quit. I wanted to really bad. But I realized that this work is bigger than me. And I found ways to take care of my mental health, because that's the thing that's been taken the most hit is just my mental health. And we actually recently had a staff meeting about our safety, our mental health, and us just being more in tune with it, because it'll creep up on you if you let it. And then burnout starts. And then you're like, and then you're not.
You need to be fiercely protective of your mental health.
Exactly. I mean, I even found this.
It's not a luxury. It's just not negotiable, which is kind of what I was talking about before.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And so I've recently brought it to my boss's attention. And, I was like, you and the people above you, this agency, y'all have got to think about our mental health at this site, because we're actually the only historic site within Charleston County parks. All the rest of them are dog parks, water parks, county parks. And so we actually recently, as a staff, helped draft, I guess you would call it like a policy on racial harassment, not just sexual harassment, and just better protecting us and our mental health. But I completely agree with you, Lauren. Fiercely protecting it is absolutely, I mean, I even found a therapist, and it's been a wonderful experience since then, being able to have someone to unpack with and be able to actually take off, at the end of the day, what I've been wearing all day. So I completely agree.
All right. Well, we are right at 7:00, so this timed out really well. Thank you, panelists, Ayla, Lauren, Olivia, so much for joining us. It was a great conversation. I feel like we could probably keep going for another hour if we needed to, but we will respect everyone's time. A few things to mention from AAAM. So our call for proposals is due tomorrow, 11:59 p.m. If you guys need any assistance, like reach out to us. We can help you out, although it is real last minute, guys. We also have opened up an HBCU internship program. It is a $10,000 program. So if you guys have any questions about that or what it entails, please reach out to us about that. And then on the 20th, next Saturday, we will have a EMP discussion about negotiating salaries. So if that's a subject that you've ever been curious about or would like to know some more information on, please reach out to us and we'd be glad to help you get registered, and we can talk about it more next weekend. Thank all of you ladies for being here.